You can taste the air before you breathe it. It is sharp, metallic, copper and sweat, laced with the faint sourness of milk left too long in the heat. The air hangs heavy, pressing against your chest, clinging to the roof of your mouth until swallowing feels like a slow drowning. Candlelight struggles in the draft, shadows slipping and stretching along the damp walls, as if something unseen moves just out of reach. The bed is a storm of crumpled linen, soaked through with blood and fluid, the scent so thick it seems to seep into your skin. The midwife's hands hover above the newborn as if afraid to touch it, the fine tremor in her fingers betraying something beyond exhaustion. On the floor at her feet, the afterbirth lies in a copper basin, steaming faintly in the cold air, untouched, unburied. The child does not cry. It does not squirm. It lies in the crook of its mother's arm with a stillness too deliberate, eyes open wide, unblinking, the dark irises catching the candlelight like polished stone. They seem to follow every movement in the room. Its hand, impossibly small, impossibly strong, has clamped around the mother's wrist. The grip is so tight the knuckles blanch, skin dimpling under the pressure. Slowly, the fingers curl deeper, tiny nails pressing until they leave pale arcs. The mother exhales in a shiver, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound escapes. Then the half-moons break. Skin tears, not with a sudden jerk but with a slow, deliberate bite of pressure. The blood that wells is dark, viscous, refusing to clot. It spreads in a thin sheen across her skin, and you watch the flesh around the wounds blanch, losing its warmth, its color, its life. The midwife flinches forward, but stops. Somewhere near the foot of the bed, an old nurse's voice slips into the air, barely more than breath. Womb feeder. The word lands like a curse. Outside, the bells of the palace ring for the birth of an heir, their distant joy at war with the stillness in this room. And here, with your eyes fixed on that pale, unblinking child, you understand that what clings to the mother is not seeking comfort. It is feeding. Beyond the chamber walls, the city breathes in celebration. From the cathedral towers to the market square, bells toll in triumphant peals, their sound washing over rooftops and echoing down narrow streets. Word travels fast. The queen has delivered an heir. Fires are lit, wine is poured, and the people lift their cups toward the palace, never knowing how far from the truth their joy has wandered. Inside the eastern wing, the air is different. The windows stay shuttered, heavy drapes pulled tight, trapping the smell of damp linen and the faint metallic trace that lingers no matter how many basins of vinegar are brought. The queen lies propped against pillows, her face turned toward the wall. Her attendants bring trays, broth, bread, stewed fruit. But the moment food touches her lips, she retches. She claims she is not hungry, that she feels strangely full, as though she has already eaten. The physicians blame exhaustion, the strain of childbirth, the fickleness of a mother's body after labor. Days pass, and the same hands that once smoothed her hair now hold her upright as she vomits into a basin after each meal. Her cheeks grow hollow, her wrists fragile as bird bones. The court's healers prescribe bitter infusions of wormwood and sage, claiming they will drive out the parasite they believe has taken root in her gut. The drafts leave her mouth dry, her breath sour, but her strength continues to bleed away. The king will not hear of it. When the palace scribes request an update for the Royal Gazette, his voice hardens. There will be no mention of illness. No shadow will mar the portrait of a dynasty reborn. The official bulletins speak only of a radiant queen recovering in peace, attended by her loyal household, her child thriving by her side. To the people, the Eastern Wing is a sanctuary of new life. To those who walk its halls, it has begun to feel more like a tomb. At night, the palace grows quiet, the laughter of the day dying into whispers. In the queen's chambers, the infant is never far from her, swaddled in black silk, its eyes open even in sleep. When it cries, her face tightens, her hands tremble, and yet she draws it closer, pressing it against her breast. The nurses exchange glances in the candlelight. They hear the small, rhythmic sounds as it feeds, but they cannot unhear the other sound beneath it, a deep, slow pull, like the hollow breath of a well. If you've never heard a story this strange from royal history before, you'll want to stay with us. And if you're new to Echoes of Time, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what history tried to hide. It is the 12th day after the birth when the queen is seen again. The palace has dressed her in pale blue silk, heavy with embroidery, the color chosen to reflect the sky above the spring gardens. Musicians gather in the courtyard, their strings tuned to carry a bright melody up to the balcony where she will stand. Courtiers murmur in anticipation. The people crowd the outer gates for a glimpse of the woman whose child has secured the line. When the doors open, the sunlight seems to hesitate before touching her. She steps forward slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed to her midsection beneath the folds of her gown. Her face is pale, her lips too dry to hold the soft smile the king expects. A ripple moves through the silk at her waist. Not the gentle flutter of fabric in the wind, but a sharp, sudden distortion, as though something inside has shifted against her skin. Those nearest to the front gasp. She sways, her knuckles whitening against the stone, and a lady-in-waiting moves forward to steady her. The appearance lasts less than a minute. She withdraws without a word, the balcony doors closing behind her with a sound that carries far longer than the applause. Inside the palace, those who tend to her notice the changes more clearly. When they strip the sheets at dawn, the linens bear faint, rust-colored specks that bloom near the places where she nurses the child. The milk is no longer pure. It carries threads of red, staining the cloth. Chambermaids lower their voices when they speak of it, as if naming the sight might invite punishment. In the physician's quarters, a locked journal begins to fill with observations no royal court would sanction. The doctor notes her pulse with precision. Every time the infant's cries pierce the room, her heart quickens, beating in strange syncopation. When the child sleeps, her pulse slows to a crawl, her breath shallow, almost absent. The conclusion is unspoken, but it bleeds through the ink. It is as if one heart drives them both. The servants who have lived longest within these walls are the first to speak of older dangers. Over cups of watered wine in the kitchens, they whisper about the afterbirth. How it was never burned, never buried. How the copper basin that held it was taken away by hands no one recognized. Some claim the child consumed it, others that it was hidden in the chamber to bind the infant to the mother in ways not meant for the living. The palace's official proclamations do not change. To the city, the queen is strong, the child is thriving, and the future is secure. But in the echoing corridors of the eastern wing, the air is thick with the sense that something unseen is shaping the fate of them both. If stories like this one leave you unsettled, you will want to stay close. And if you have not yet joined us here on Echoes of Time, now is the moment to subscribe, so you never miss the truths that history tried to bury. By the turn of the 3rd month, the child has changed in ways no one dares to put in writing. Its growth is not measured in inches or weight, but in the unsettling speed with which its body adapts. Tiny teeth, sharp and uneven, push through the gums long before they should. Fingernails harden into pale, translucent points, catching in the silk swaddles, leaving threads pulled loose. The nurses murmur that the child's eyes follow movements with a predator's patience, the gaze never breaking until the figure it watches is gone from the room. Attempts to place the infant with a wet nurse fail without exception. The moment another woman's breast is offered, the child turns away, its mouth clamped shut, body rigid with refusal. Yet when returned to the queen, it feeds with desperate force, the sound of her muffled cries pressing through the door to the outer chambers. At times she bites her own lip to keep from screaming, drawing blood that stains the fine linen at her throat. Still, she does not push the child away. Physicians are summoned under the pretense of routine care. Behind closed doors, they press their stethoscopes to her abdomen and freeze. There is a noise, low and deliberate, like something gnawing softly at wood from deep inside the walls. The sound is rhythmic, mechanical in its persistence, yet it is alive. It stops the moment the infant is taken from her arms, only to resume when it is returned. One physician, pale with disbelief, writes in his private notes that it is as though the mother herself has become the cradle for its continued consumption. But these words remain locked away, for to speak them would be to invite the wrath of both king and church. At night, the queen is seen walking the dim corridor between her chamber and the nursery, though no one hears her footsteps. The child is always in her arms, its head pressed against her chest, its fingers curled in the fabric over her heart. Those who glimpse them in passing swear the two look less like mother and child, and more like a single being divided between two bodies. The deeper we go into this case, the stranger it becomes. And if you think this is shocking, let us know in the comments what you'd do if you were in her place. Then make sure you're subscribed for more untold histories. The whispers reach the cloisters before they reach the king's ear. In the shadowed halls of the abbey, where candlelight bends low over carved stone, the elder sisters speak of what they have heard. A queen wasting away, a child who will not take milk from any breast but hers, a bond that drains rather than nourishes. The abbess, a woman old enough to remember the last famine, sends word to the palace in a sealed letter. She warns of an ancient curse, naming it in the old tongue. Of the inside out, the spirit reborn in flesh, feeding upon the vessel that carried it into the world. The king does not show the letter to his court, but he summons his confessor. That night, 3 priests are led in through the servants' gate. They move quietly, robes brushing against the cold flagstones, their eyes lowered as they pass beneath the vaulted ceilings of the eastern wing. They speak no Latin prayers aloud. Instead, they murmur in the dialect of the hinterlands, words meant to sever what cannot be seen. Under the queen's pillow they leave a pair of iron scissors, points closed, tied with red thread, a charm to cut the invisible cord that binds her to the child. For 2 nights, the scissors remain untouched. On the 3rd, they are found on the floor, their blades bent, the red thread in tatters. No one will say how they came to be there. It is the guards who speak first of the sounds. During the long hours before dawn, they hear muffled cries from behind the bolted door, followed by a noise they cannot name, wet, deliberate, like fabric tearing underwater. When morning comes, the queen's hands are bare, her nails rimmed in dried blood. She keeps them folded in her lap, refusing to speak. The royal council convenes in secret. Voices rise in the vaulted chamber as the dukes and ministers argue. Some insist the child must be taken away, perhaps hidden in a monastery, perhaps sent across the sea. Others demand its death outright, fearing what it will become if left to grow. Yet when the archbishop rises, the room falls silent. He calls the infant God's mystery, and declares that to interfere would be to destroy a divine work, however terrible it may seem. His word is final. That night, the queen is left alone with her child once more. Beyond her walls, the city sleeps in ignorance, and the bells in the cathedral tower toll the hour as if marking time for something no one dares name. This is one of those moments where history forces you to take a side. Tell us yours in the comments, and if you haven't yet, subscribe so you can follow stories like this to their chilling end. By the 6th month, her body no longer hides what is happening. The change is most visible when she sits upright in bed. One side of her abdomen has collapsed inward, the curve of her ribs pressing sharply against the skin, while her hips and limbs remain untouched by the wasting. It is as though whatever consumes her has chosen a single region for its feast, hollowing it slowly, methodically. The physicians no longer speak in gentle euphemisms. In his private ledger, one writes that her condition resembles internal leprosy, the quiet, merciless erosion of flesh from within. But there is no infection in the blood, no fever, no wasting of the organs that can be traced with the instruments of the time. Only the steady vanishing of her body's substance, with no explanation that would dare leave his lips in the presence of the court. Beneath her skin, bruises appear. They are not the deep, flat stains of a blow, but faint ovals, each with a paler center, the shape disturbingly like the impression of teeth. When pressed, they weep thin streams of blood through her pores, as though some unseen mouth had bitten and drawn without breaking the surface. She flinches when these marks are touched, not from the pain itself, but from the memory of how they formed. And still the child flourishes. Its hair thickens to a rich, unnatural sheen. Its skin glows with the warmth of perfect health, and its limbs grow strong far beyond what the age should allow. Nursemaids whisper of moments when its small hands grip the bedpost with such force that the wood creaks in protest. It is during this time that the disappearances begin. Servants who work the eastern wing vanish from their posts without collecting their wages. One is found 2 days later, lying in the shadow of the north wall, her face bloodless, her arm bearing a perfect row of teeth marks. When the guard reports the finding, the physician measures the marks against a plaster impression of the queen's jaw, taken long before the illness. The alignment is exact. The record of that discovery is locked away, sealed in the palace archive where only the king's personal key can open it. Publicly, her condition is still described as recovery, and the child is shown in the gardens, rosy and smiling, as the people cheer from beyond the gates. The truth remains behind the bolted doors of the eastern wing, where life and death are no longer separate forces, but a single hunger wearing two faces. If the thought of what is happening here chills you, stay with us. And if you have not yet, subscribe to Echoes of Time, so you never miss the histories the world tried to hide. The christening was meant to be small, quiet, and without the spectacle expected of a royal heir. Only the king, a handful of trusted courtiers, the archbishop, and the chosen godparents stood within the chapel's dim stone walls. Candles burned low, their smoke curling upward into the vaulted ribs of the ceiling, carrying the scent of incense meant to sanctify the air. The queen entered slowly, her gown pale and heavy, the child swaddled in silver cloth against her chest. She moved as though each step required thought, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the altar. When she reached the basin, the priest began the blessing, the water catching the candlelight in quick, trembling reflections. It happened between one word and the next. Her knees buckled, the child still clutched tight in her arms as her body pitched sideways. A cry went up as the midwife and 2 guards caught her before she struck the flagstones. She convulsed, her head twisting to the side, her hands locked around the infant with such force the swaddle strained. The midwife, leaning close, would later swear she saw something shifting beneath the queen's skin. Not the vague movement of muscles, but a defined form, gliding from one side of her torso to the other, pressing outwards as it passed. The ritual ended there. No blessing was completed, no holy water touched the child. By nightfall, the queen was confined to her chambers under orders from the king. The shutters were nailed shut, the curtains drawn and bound. Heavy boards were fixed across the windows from the outside, the sound of hammering echoing down the eastern corridors. Guards were posted at the doors, but none were permitted entry unless summoned. The child remained with her at all times, and no wet nurse was called. From within, there were sounds, low at first, a murmur, the rustle of fabric. Then the screams began. Thick curtains muffled them by day, but on windless nights, they spilled into the courtyard, thin and ragged, carrying farther than any bell. They rose and fell with no pattern, sometimes breaking into gasps, sometimes ending with a silence so sudden it felt heavier than the noise. Those who walked past on night patrol avoided looking up at her windows. The boards hid the glass, but some swore they saw the fabric shift behind them, as though something or someone stood just on the other side, listening. If this part leaves you unsettled, imagine living in the palace as it happened. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you're here for the final chapter. It was just after the 3rd watch when the order was given. The corridor outside the queen's chamber lay in darkness, save for the faint glow of oil lamps carried low to the ground. 6 men moved together, 3 physicians, 2 guards, and the king's own confessor, their faces half hidden in the flicker. No one spoke. The sound of their boots on the flagstones was swallowed by the heavy stillness that had settled over the eastern wing. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale incense and something sweeter beneath it, a smell that clung to the skin, turning the stomach. The queen lay on the bed, her eyes half closed, her skin stretched tight over the ridges of her bones. The child slept in the crook of her arm, its head resting on the hollow between her shoulder and neck, as if it had grown into the curve of her body. The guards moved first, prying her fingers open one by one to free the swaddle. Even in sleep, her grip resisted, the tendons in her hands pulling taut, her knuckles whitening as though her body acted without her mind's command. When the infant was finally lifted away, its eyes snapped open, not with the startled cry of a waking child, but with silent, unblinking awareness. The physicians did not speak of what happened next. Later, one would drink himself into ruin. Another would leave the city entirely. But fragments of their actions leaked through the servants' gossip. How they cut into her side, not to take the child from her womb, but to sever something that bound them still. Not a cord of flesh, but something unseen, something that recoiled when touched and yet could not be left intact. The work lasted less than an hour. When they emerged, the child was gone, carried away in a covered basket down the servants' stair. Its destination was never officially recorded, but rumor claimed it was taken to a coastal abbey where the windows were narrow and no mirrors were permitted within the walls. Some said the monks there were blind, so they would never see what they were tending. The queen lived through the night, but she did not rise from her bed. The wound left behind did not heal in the manner of other cuts. It did not bleed, not in the ordinary way. Instead, a pale, milky fluid seeped from it, staining the bandages, carrying a faint, almost sweet odor. This went on for weeks, until the skin around the dressing softened and bruised, as if the flesh beneath were slowly giving way. The bells that had once rung for her child's birth were silent now. Only the sea winds carried word away from the palace, whispers of a queen who had lived to see her child taken, and of a thing removed from her that no one dared to name. If you've followed this far, you know the darkness in this story has only deepened. Subscribe to Echoes of Time so you will be here when the last veil is lifted, and tell us in the comments, what do you think was truly removed that night? Within a month of the midnight intervention, the queen's presence in the palace began to vanish in ways more deliberate than time could erase. The first to go were the portraits. Every likeness painted since the day of her confinement was taken down under the pretense of restoration. Canvases were cut from their frames, their edges curling in the heat of the hearths where they were burned. The ashes were scattered in the palace gardens, though not a gardener would admit to touching them. The chroniclers were next. In the royal ledger, where every birth and death of the line was carefully inscribed, her entry remained but was altered. The date of her son's birth was left untouched, but beside her name, the word departed was written in a measured hand. No cause, no date, no tomb. She was, on paper, gone. Even as she breathed the air of a room far from the public eye, the child fared differently. His name was never entered into the ledger at all. It was as though he had never been born. The official decrees spoke only of the king's continuing reign, the unity of the realm, and the blessings of heaven upon the dynasty. No mention was made of an heir, nor of the strange gap his absence left in the line of succession. But beyond the reach of the court censors, the story refused to die. Travelers along the coast began to speak of an abbey perched on a cliffside, where the wind sang constantly through the narrow windows and the bells rang in odd intervals, never matching the hours. Among the brothers there, they said, was a young monk who spoke rarely, ate sparingly, and kept to the shadowed cloisters even in full daylight. What drew the most unease was not his silence, nor his pallor, but the way his shadow behaved. When he walked, it lagged behind him, slow and deliberate, its shape sometimes shifting, elongating, as though it belonged to something else entirely. Those who noticed learned quickly to look away. The brothers of the abbey would offer no explanation. They claimed only that he had been placed in their care by royal command, and that his presence was a vow they could not break. In the capital, no one spoke of the queen anymore. Her rooms in the eastern wing were locked and the keys kept in a chest with no label. The servants assigned there were moved to other posts, the corridors closed off, the windows shuttered until ivy claimed the walls. Some stories are erased so completely that finding them is like raising the dead, and that's what we do here on Echoes of Time. Subscribe now, and let us know in the comments if you think this child still lived into adulthood. Years later, when the queen finally died, her passing was announced with the same cold brevity that had marked her erasure from the royal record. No procession wound through the city, no cathedral bells told her name. Her coffin was sealed before it left her chamber, the wood bound with iron bands, the lid never opened for public viewing. It was said the burial took place at night, under a moon hidden by heavy cloud. The cart that carried her body left the palace through the postern gate and did not travel to the royal crypt, but to the cliffside abbey where the boy, or whatever the boy had become, was said to dwell. The monks took the coffin in silence, bearing it down into the earth beneath the chapel floor. The grave was unmarked. In the years that followed, fishermen along the coast told of strange nights when storms rose without warning, the sea battering the rocks below the abbey walls. On those nights, when the wind fell still between the thunder, a different sound could be heard, faint, irregular, almost too low to notice unless you were listening for it. Muffled cries, coming from beneath the stones, as if the earth itself had remembered how to speak. Back in the capital, the eastern wing of the palace had long since been abandoned. The ivy climbed higher, shuttered windows sagged under the weight of seasons. Yet, in the very center of what had once been the queen's chambers, something had taken root. A single tree grew there, its trunk thin but unbending, its bark the color of burnt bone. In spring, it bore fruit, small, pale orbs with skin so delicate they bruised at a touch. When cut open, they revealed no flesh, no seed, only air, hollow, as if the life had been drawn from them before it could form. Visitors to the gardens were told it was a curiosity, an accident of soil and shade. But the old gardeners, the ones who had been there in the queen's time, kept their distance. They claimed its roots ran black beneath the earth, deeper than any spade could follow. And so the question lingered, whispered in the back rooms of taverns and in the quiet of the cloisters. What had truly been born in that chamber all those years ago? Was it human? Was it parasite? Or was it something in between? A hunger given shape, passed from mother to child, and left to grow in the dark where no one dared to look? If you've walked through this story to its end, you know that history does not always bury what it cannot explain. Some things it plants. And if you wish to see what else has taken root in the shadows of time, subscribe to Echoes of Time, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them are finished.